समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
Addressing the troops at the Bhuj military station, Defense Minister Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh said just the other day, earlier this week, that Pakistan is building new fortifications on the western bank of the Sir Creek. Remember, it's not Seer Creek, it's not SIR Creek, it is Sir Creek. And why is it called Sir Creek? It's called Sir Creek after a British official, a British colonial official, in fact, in the era of the East India Company, who used to be heading the Bombay, what later came to be known as Bombay Presidency, this entire Sindh and Kutch area, including Bombay. His name was Sir James Ribbett Karnak. So when this creek became controversial in the very early 20th century, see in 1908, because of a dispute between the Rao of Kutch, the ruler of Kutch, and the Sindh administration, which was under the British. Then, since the Bombay Presidency governed both these territories, what is today's Gujarat and what was earlier Maharashtra, they then decided to bring about some kind of a settlement between the two rulers. And that settlement was arrived at 1914, 1914, and that in fact 1914 settlement, so-called settlement, is where the root of the trouble in Sir Creek lies. So see Sir Creek on your map. It's very narrow. It's not that long. It's about 96 kilometers or 60 miles. At its widest, which is where it meets the Arabian Sea in high tide or in rainy season, it can go to the width of 2 to 3 kilometers. The rest of it, in fact, as it goes inland, it narrows. So it's like a dagger that's going inland, and then it meanders its way through mangroves and also mud flats. It's not much of a real estate to have. However, it sits in a very critical zone, and I will explain to you why. Now, on the west side of it is Pakistan. On the eastern bank of it is India. The Pakistanis think, or they claim, that their boundaries should begin on the eastern bank of Sir Creek, which means all of Sir Creek should be with them. All right, Sir Creek is 96 kilometers. If you see the width varying from maybe a few hundred meters to 2 to 3 kilometers, it's not more than 100 to 150 square kilometers, depending on the tide. It's very little territory. However, what it does is, because the definition of your territorial waters, your exclusive economic zone, and your continental shelf, that begins from where your coast is, right? It's from there that you start measuring at low tide, not at high tide, at low tide. You start measuring from there. And that is what changes quite significantly if you are 3 kilometers that side or 3 kilometers this side. So Pakistan wants the boundary line on the eastern bank. What India wants is to follow what is called as the Thalberg principle. Thalberg is a German word which means midstream, or the stream of the most navigable point. Europe is the inventor of boundary disputes, at least in the modern era. So they came up with this principle that if two countries share a river between them, then the border will be at the deepest point in the river, or the most navigable point in the river. That is India's view. Now, what did Rajnath Singh say? Rajnath Singh said that Pakistan has been seen to be building fortifications on its own side of the Sir Creek. That is the western side of Sir Creek. And in case they carry out any adventure across Sir Creek, or try to take any territory, or try to establish the borders that they believe are justified, I'm now paraphrasing it, he didn't quite say it. He just said if Pakistan tries any adventure, That will change. They should remember that this will change history and geography. That's the reason I thought we should talk about Sir Creek today, because it's history, it's geography, and it's also, quite frankly, hydrography, which is different from hydrology. So, in fact, to try and understand this better, I read up some papers that have been published on this, because this has been an issue between India and Pakistan. I also called retired Admiral Raja Menon, who used to be the chief hydrographer of Indian Navy. Now a succession of chief hydrographers of Indian Navy have been involved in drawing these maritime boundaries. And in the India-Pakistan negotiations, Sir Creek, again remember, named after Sir James Rivet Karnak. Everybody has followed that name. Angrez aaye, chale gaye, but the Pakistanis, our system, they all follow that Sir Creek name. Nobody is bothered giving it another name, because then the two countries will fight over what we should name it after. Nevertheless, it is geography, history, and hydrography. Now, history, I told you, 1908, the two rulers, the ruler of Kutch and the ruler of Sindh, they came to a dispute, and that dispute was not over any maritime rights or over determining what is whose EEZ or territorial waters. Those principles were not even established. Remember, even the United Nations Convention on Law of the Seas, that was only adopted in 1982. So these are very modern laws. There was no such concern at that point. Nobody was going deep into the seas, either to fish with mechanized trawlers or to look for oil and gas or other minerals. All that was not in contention. What was in contention was rights to pick up firewood. And what firewood, I imagine, could be available in this region, but for dead mangroves. So over that, the two principalities were having an argument, and that's when the British came in. When the British came in 1914, the British brought in a settlement which they said the two sides agreed on, and that settlement had a confusion. Like most things that the British did with the subcontinent or colonial territories, they did not close an issue. In fact, instead of closing an issue, they complicated it for coming generations. So clause 9 in that so-called settlement that the British brought about, clause 9 says that the boundary between the two principalities on Sir Creek will be on the eastern side. On the British maps, that is drawn in green. So that's the green line. That is the line that Pakistan claims. But so this is clause 10. But then these were the colonial British, right? Could they write anything straight? Could they draw any line which would not be disputed? Answer is no. So they also said in clause 10 that the boundary will be midstream. It will be in the middle of the stream of Sir Creek, which is following in modern times, which is following the Thalberg principle. So today Pakistan is insisting that they will go by clause 9 of that 1914 agreement, so-called agreement. India, on the other hand, says that we will follow the Thalberg principle, which is also underlined by the clause 10 of the same agreement. Now, further on, in 1925, to strengthen India's case, there are pillars, boundary pillars, that were erected by the British between the Sindh administration and the Rao of Kutch. Many of those pillars still survive. Now, this argument has gone on and on and on, and when things are better between India and Pakistan, when they have composite dialogues, or when they say we will sort out our problems, this is seen as the easiest of the problems to resolve. It is seen as a prime early harvest argument that you can settle it. However, you have to understand how this is done, and I will explain to you once again. See this creek on the map. As the creek comes out towards the Arabian Sea, it widens. Now, Indian side has one complaint. Indian side's complaint is that the Pakistanis, they've been draining a lot of water from the left bank of the Indus, because a lot of Pakistani agricultural land has become saline because of canal waters, and also overuse of fertilizers, etc. Fertilizers, insecticides, pesticides. So they drain all of that water in a canal, and that canal is called LBOD, or left bank outfall drain. This is not a small drain or canal, it's 270 kilometers. It comes from the left bank of Indus River and brings this water into the Sur Creek, which takes it into the Arabian Sea. So India believes that by bringing in this water, Pakistan is trying to change the character or the dimensions or the layout of the creek, because this is very fragile, and given tidal pressures and given the monsoons and given how much water comes in, it keeps on changing its shape and direction. However, the water from the Indus also brings in a lot of nutrients. Because it brings a lot of nutrients, so you know what? Who knows it better than the fish, and who knows it better than the prawns and shrimp? So a lot of them come to this area so they can have a better meal. That's why fishermen from both sides know that this is the place where they should go to find the best possible catch. And that's how both Indian and Pakistani fishermen keep going into this area. Because the maritime boundary is not demarcated, the Pakistani Coast Guard come and catch Indian fishermen. Indian Coast Guard goes and catches Pakistani fishermen. Then routinely every couple of years, or if the going is good between India and Pakistan, sometimes even within a year, these multiple exchanges of fishermen prisoners take place. That is the local problem. However, there is a bigger problem, and that is what raises the stakes. Now, what happens is that your any country's territorial waters are 12 nautical miles. One nautical mile is 1.852 kilometers. So calculation should be easy, but I will just give you to make it easy for you, because it's cut the clutter. 12 nautical mile is 22.224 kilometers. That is your territorial waters. Anybody coming in there, your Navy Coast Guard can challenge, either arrest or detain, push back or sink, right? This is your territorial waters. This is your own courtyard, no problem. Then there is an exclusive economic zone of 200 nautical miles. 200 nautical miles is 370.4 kilometers. That is available to you for free exploitation of its economic resources, right? It is not your territorial waters, but you can exploit its economic resources. The third thing comes in. That is the continental shelf. Now, continental shelf is when a continent naturally slopes into the sea. At some point, that natural slope ends, and then you have a sharp drop. So where that slope ends, that is where a continental shelf ends. Usually, your continental shelf does not go beyond 370 kilometers, which is your EEZ. So the distinction between the two doesn't arise. But on the Indian western coast, continental shelf is really long, and in many places it goes beyond the EEZ. EEZ meaning 370.4 kilometers. So if your continental shelf goes beyond your EEZ, then you can appeal to international bodies and you can ask for an extension. You can then claim a continental shelf up to 350 nautical miles or 648.2 kilometers. Again, I told you about the width and the length of the creek. How deep it is not deep at all. At high tide, when there is a lot of water, where it meets the Arabian Sea, it's at its deepest, and at its deepest it would be 5 to 10 meters only. That's not much more than an Olympic sized swimming pool's depth. Most of it is just a couple of meters, if at all. A lot of it remains marshy, and you can also walk across it in large parts of it. So this is a very messy area. Now the dispute here is, or the stakes here are, that 3 kilometers this side or 3 kilometers that side. Where does the land boundary between the two countries begin? From there, you will then go out and define these territorial waters and EEZ and also your continental shelf. That ultimately, if continental shelf goes way beyond your EEZ, can involve thousands of square kilometers of water territory, sea territory. And that is where the belief is, or at least it's largely understood by both sides, that there are lots of mineral resources and also oil and gas. So no country is willing to part with any of this. However, the two countries had spoken about it in good times, I told you, and come to some kind of a resolution, because as I told you, this was seen as the earliest of the early harvest. So the resolution was that The two countries, first of all, hydrographers met several times. They carried out joint surveys, particularly between 2005 and 2007, and they fixed a notional point on the seas, and from there they came into the mouth of the Sur Creek, and then they said that if the starting point is on the east bank, which is the Pakistani claim, then this much is the EEZ and continental shelf and territorial waters. If it starts from the middle of the stream, which is the Indian claim, then it is this much. How do you resolve this? The resolution was, and that awaited political clearance. Finally, that did not come. The resolution was that either side can choose one of the two options, but you can choose. The Pakistani side could choose the East Bank option, or the Indian side could choose the midstream option. However, whoever made the first choice will get only 40% of the maritime property that this will create. The other side will get 60%. So this was a deal of land in exchange of the seas. You want more of the seas, you want more of the marshy land. That's a choice you make. So it was 60-40 either way. Pakistanis wanted the East Bank. They will only get 40% of maritime territory, going right up to the continental shelf. India wants the midstream, then India will only get 40% of that maritime territory. However, that agreement awaited political clearance. It did not happen. I can see why, because Pakistanis then saw a crisis with the decline of Musharraf and challenges for him. On the Indian side also, there was some indecision. There was opposition from the BJP. In fact, we came close to another settlement in 2011 when there was a joint statement that said that there was determination to settle the Sir Creek issue. But then in 2012, Gujarat was heading for elections, and Chief Minister then Narendra Modi, he wrote a strong letter to the Prime Minister. He also brought it up at a big meeting of Chief Ministers with the Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, saying you cannot afford to give any of the Sir Creek to Pakistan because that's an area very rich in oil and gas. And if anything, India should double up on its efforts to start digging for more oil and gas there. So he objected to it, and that deal could not take place. And that is where the situation stands even now. Sir James Rivet Karnak, who was governor of Bombay Presidency under East India Company from 1838 to 1841. He is the one, Sir Lat Sahab, he is the one that this creek is named after even now. Now, since we talked about history, I told you the history of Sir Creek, but there is also a history to the Kutch region. Kutch region is very important for India. A lot of our economic resources are there. For example, a lot of our solar power is coming up in the Kutch area because it has wide open lands, and it has a lot of sunshine, right? It has wildlife, it has great human diversity. It's one of the most important and interesting parts of India. So in 1965, on April 1, All Fools Day, the Pakistanis decided, they thought by this time that they were really strong militarily, they've got all this American equipment, and India was still punch drunk after the defeat against China in 1962, and the Indian armed forces were rebuilding. So they thought they will test their equipment and also check out the Indian armed forces resolve by launching a limited strike in the Kutch region, which they did. They used their newly acquired patent tanks, they used their saber jets there. India decided for tactical and strategic reasons not to bring in the heavy stuff into Kutch to fight the Pakistanis, because probably Pakistan's motive was also to distract India and also to trick India into shifting some of its heavy units, its armored units, for example, from Punjab and from the Kashmir area to Kutch. It was a long distance. This was 60 years ago. Transport wasn't that easy. Logistics were not that easy. And maybe because they were planning an attack, in a big attack in Kashmir, within just a few months, they thought it was a good idea now to trick India into bringing the heavy stuff on this side. That the Shastri government did not do. They agreed on mediation. The British Prime Minister Harold Wilson mediated. A ceasefire came in. Both sides withdrew to wherever they were before the clash. Pakistanis had called this operation Desert Hawk. India had called our own Operation Kabaddi. So troops returned to where they were before this Operation Desert Hawk and Kabaddi, and a tribunal was set up. That tribunal was headed by Gunnar Lagergren. Gunnar Lagergren was an eminent Swedish jurist and also president of the Supreme Administrative Court of Sweden. Then Pakistan, either side could nominate one member. Pakistan nominated a member from Iran. India nominated a member from Yugoslavia. This tribunal gave its order in 1968. In 1968, under that order, 9,000, little over 9,000 square kilometers were under contention, or Pakistan's claim was over about 9,000 something kilometers. The tribunal gave them 780 kilometers. That's significant less than even 10%. And that drew the boundary. However, the unfortunate thing is, while this issue had gone to the tribunal, both countries decided in their eternal wisdom, or maybe lack of it, not to add the Sir Creek area to the tribunal's jurisdiction. That's why the border line that the tribunal drew, and you can see it on our map, the blue line is the new boundary that the tribunal drew. That blue line begins at the top of Sir Creek, from where Sir Creek begins on land. And that's how this issue, Sir Creek issue, has festered since then. So right now, I don't think any claims are being repeated. I don't think there is much military movement in that area. There are some Pakistani fortifications which have been noticed. But you know what? India and Pakistan will both look at this very seriously, because if you settle with Pakistan on their claim line of the eastern bank, then what it means is that pretty much Pakistanis are sitting next to your land. They don't get any land, but they can come right up to your land border. So effectively, your land border with Pakistan gets extended by another 96 kilometers. And similarly, if India is in the middle, then India gets a lot more of the maritime territory, and Pakistanis would like to obviously deny India that. At the same time, it suits the Pakistanis to keep the pot boiling, particularly now when they see no particular benefit in making any long-term peace with Pakistan, because the army is in charge, and indirectly what they want is a constant state of tension and friction with India, because that helps justify their rule and also gives them their glory and respect. And that rule, however indirect it might be, so they are the ones calling the shots. And one reason they've come back, they've got back their national respect in Pakistan, is because of these new tensions with India. So these suit them entirely, and that's how this issue, which has always been called the easiest to resolve in the earliest of early harvests, still festers on.